You guys. The man of steel with us today.
Yep. Getting to every meeting I can at the moment.
How you doing, David McKillop?
Hey, good, Andy. Yourself?
Look in this chilly weather.
Megan's done an apology. She's done her back end a bit off the osteo and back, and we'll get her when she can.
Well, hopefully she's having a radiology request developed for her.
You mean radiology IG request or radiology request?
Well, I am hoping it's a completely digital experience end to end. More than likely a handwritten note from some GP saying, go and get your back looked at.
Yeah. Go, get imaging, please.
Yeah, make it so.
Or maybe it's just sort of like a sort of wiggly line.
And the commission saying, no, don't get imaging.
Unless you can give us an RRS or RRV code, we won't do it.
Yeah.
So she better be pretty hopeful that it falls into RRV. I don't like her odds either. Especially if it's like a known vertebrae. Then yeah, that doesn't work too well.
You've got history there, Andy.
Well, I've spent I've spent many a long hour with my friend Claude trying to backfill the post-coordinated codes into a code system supplement to add in properties for the other post-coordinated codes, which kind of is going all right. But then I went off piste and started going, well, if you can do it for RRV, why don't you do it for all of these other codes I happen to have as well? And Claude began struggling a bit about bariatric things and, various other weird and wacky things that are actually not covered by RRS and RRV. Still boggles my mind that RRS doesn't cover DEXA.
Yeah, we're trying to chase that up with them. But it's interesting you said the bariatric stuff. We've been talking to the college there because there's a bit of work there where some of the language used is a bit different to what's currently in the terminology. But yeah, we definitely need to improve that RRS coverage.
Tim, does the expand on Onto server apply to the synonyms when you filter it?
Yep.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. It was kind of obvious, but it wasn't clear to me, or I couldn't find documentation, and I didn't have one to test. But I thought it would.
They're considered less strongly than display text, I think. I think they don't score quite as high, but they are matched. So.
Yep.
But if you've got a list you want to send us, Andy, we can chase it up, but we'll have to liaise with the college for that.
And you can get Andy to put them in his supplements too if you need. You can add synonyms in a supplement.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things like Dexter and that are map, but they're not equivalent terms yet. So hopefully the work being done with the International SNOMED will help close that gap faster now.
Does Onto server collate the synonyms from the base code system and add in ones you put? Like if in my value set I express a SNOMED code and add synonyms to it, like Angus's synonyms, do they apply, or do the base code systems apply, or are they put together?
I'd have to check for ones I'm not sure that you can add synonyms in a value set.
But in a
I
code
guess you could-
in a code system supplement, if you added
Yes.
synonyms, so they just get overlaid and merged with the synonyms from the original.
Yeah, they're additional ones.
Ouch.
Yep.
So you need your own code system over the top of the SNOMED codes to add your own synonyms. A supplement code system.
Yeah, supplement. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, they're very.
I think so. I'd have to check. We've gone backwards and forward. The vocab's changed its mind, I think, on things that get declared in value sets. There's some things you can declare, like order properties and things, but using extensions. But I think synonyms and displays you can't change in the value set. I think I'd have to check. But
Fun times. This is why we need a terminology work group.
Yes, maybe. Yes. Well, maybe Jim can just come to every worker every time.
Yeah, who needs Claude when you have Jim?
Exactly.
All right, everyone. Welcome to eRequesting for another fortnightly cathartic session of complaints and suggestions. Let me share my screen and I'll just stick up the meeting minutes. I'm a bit discoordinated. Today, I guess I'll just do a acknowledging the lands on which we meet, which is all over the place given we're telemeeting. So just acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. Today, we are continuing on from where we were last time. So first thing we're going to do is to review the meeting minutes from the previous week, which is 16th. Has anyone had a chance to look through them? Anyone wish to put forward a motion?
I've looked through them, but that's, obvious.
Well, that's kind of, that's a good thing, David.
I like how you've caught David Willock's smile great there in the notes.
Oh, that's a good one, isn't it? We could put that on we could put on t-shirts.
I'll second the notes.
All right.
Who was the mover?
Who was the first?
I thought David was. Was David not allowed to be?
I probably can't.
We did write them, so yeah.
No, you can do it, David.
Of course he can.
All right.
He thinks
Okay.
it's correct. He's not the chair. He can take the motion.
I'm glad you're here, Brett. Right. So we have two. Does anyone wish to vote against the acceptance of the minutes? Does anyone wish to not vote?
Brett here. I'll abstain. Yeah.
1, 2, 4. How many seeing 4? Are there more? 5. Okay. And the rest we'll take as affirmative. Thank you very much. Back to today. The work we are looking to do today is, I'm hoping that Angus and Vince have some examples that we can have a discussion around. And we'll again briefly mention the bundle stuff. Jim's here to spruik terminologies, and in a good way. And then if we do have time at the end of it, we will start the discussion around transfer of fulfillment, patient choice, whatever you want to call it. We'll start to discuss some of the attributes of that and what we need to consider going forward. Is there anything? Oh, there's a hand up. Nari. Oh, hand down.
Sorry, I didn't lower it. Sorry, Andy.
Oh,
From the vote.
it's all right. Okay.
Yep. Sorry.
That's
sorry.
Right. Ruben's put his up, so I'm presuming his excuse is he didn't lower it either. Hopefully.
Oh
Ruben.
no, I actually did want to ask if there might be a minute or two for me to give everyone a heads up on something else in the terminology work group after Jim. It'll only take a minute or two.
Yes, the terminology work group can have multiple things that they can talk about if you would if you can want to round up anyone else to come along and put something
Thank
in,
you,
we can
Chair.
do that too.
All
No
good.
worries.
Cheers.
We're here to help. Okay, so is there anything beyond specimen terminology and maybe the patient choice stuff that people would like to put on the agenda for today?
And Jim stuff.
Yeah, Jim. Well, Jim's a terminology. Jim's part of the terminology mafia, so he's going to come in with that. So we might just do the. Do you want to do the terminology stuff first, Angus? Is that?
I think so. He's got 10, 15, even if he takes 20. I think
Okay.
Probably do Jim stuff first.
Okay.
Sure.
That way
Let's
Jim
go.
can leave if he's not interested in specimens.
Everyone loves a good specimen.
Yeah.
Okay. Jim, over to you.
Sure. I might share a few slides if that's all right.
Certainly is. I'll stop. Oh, I already did.
There we go. So what I'm here to talk about is the Terminology Workgroup has a project that we've been calling THO AU, which is HL7 Australia Terminology Implementation Guide. So the idea of this project is to is deliberately thin at the moment. It's got high-level ambitions, but there's a lot of details still to be fleshed out. And the reason we're coming around to all the work groups is that we want a lot of that detail to come from the work groups, not just from the terminology work group, because a lot of the aims of the project are to alleviate some of the difficulties and challenges with dealing with terminology for other HL7 Australia IGs, including the eRequesting ones. So the scope statement for our project scope statement, which we're sort of starting to draft now, is something that we really want to be informed by the other work groups. None of this is sort of a fait accompli. A lot of it is voluntary on the part of the other work groups. If they want any of their terminology content to move into the terminology IG, then they can, and if they don't, then it won't. We'd like this to be a conversation because really, certainly I see this as something about helping the other work groups sort of manage the load of managing terminology. So the project proposal is about defining, or not defining, but publishing artifacts, terminology artifacts for use by other IGs based on a collaborative model to assist other work groups achieve their outcomes for terminology and in the context of their processes. What that collaborative model looks like is part of the project, is to determine what that is. The IG would also document maintenance processes for these contents. So what happens when new codes need to be added, or codes need to be retired, or other maintenance processes. We're looking at publishing some profiles of terminology resource types, so probably starting with value set and code system, and possibly concept map, depending on the appetite from the other work groups. To encourage some best practice and uniformity, which is already pretty good, but there's still some things that could be done there. Some process and governance guidance for terminology resources, both the ones in the IG and also for other resources. And hopefully some guidance about the use of external terminology in the Australian context as well. A lot of which is already published in places like the HL7 Australia or HL7 Confluence, but we're trying to sort of put that in a central place for people to go and consult that. So what this is not about is this isn't about a takeover of content from any other work group. We have no mandate to do that, and we're not interested in doing that. It's not about requiring any other IG to depend on the terminology IG or to contribute to it. And it's not a decision that's already been made about how what content goes in or how it gets managed if it goes in. So I've sort of come here trying to gather some information as well as share what we're trying to do. So we want to include in our scope statement some of the challenges that that other work groups have with dealing with terminology. Some of the things that we've heard that update and publication cycles can be sometimes challenging, that they don't always, sometimes there's a desire to update terminology without having to go through the full ballot process for another IG. Sometimes version dependencies can be challenging as well. There's time spent working with terminology resources that could be better spent on other parts of your IGs. There have been some instances of changes landing with a workgroup's IG without them knowing about it. Sometimes from outside, but we want to come up with a good model for informing and consulting and getting approval from workgroups that are affected by changes to terminology resources that we can certainly apply within HL7 Australia, but then also we can offer to other people who are publishing terminologies that might affect our workgroups as well. There are some artifacts that are shared across several workgroups, and we want to make sure that we can handle that situation so that all necessary workgroups are consulted or informed about changes. And there are some small discrepancies in how particularly value sets and code systems are authored across IGs. It's pretty good overall, to be honest, but there's some things like all codes value sets, which I have a feeling is actually more relevant to this work group than some others. Not to say that this work group has discrepancies, but there's some all codes value sets that are defined by eRequesting for code systems that are defined by base, I think. So my first question is, are these things that affect eRequesting, and are they things that you feel like you could get some help from a terminology implementation guide? Pause for input if people want to provide any.
I guess in my mind that the key thing is where we identified terminology which we recognise has wider use than our IG. That's the primary one that comes in my mind. Like then we would engage the terminology working group and say perhaps this should be your terminology which we would reuse.
Yeah, that would be the sort of number one case that we'd be looking at. Yeah.
Vince.
Sorry, Vince. Yeah.
So do you see your scope as extending to the current HL7 tables, things like assigning authority and so on, that have had some Australian values added to them in the past, but are not currently under any governance? Do you see that sort of update? Because I mean, those sorts of value sets are relevant to FHIR as well as to V2.
I think they're in scope. I think currently they're managed by probably I think that one specifically, I had a bit of a look, is kind of managed across the FHIR work group and this work group, possibly. And so, yeah, it would be a candidate. As I said, we're not looking to take any resources, but where there are resources that are managed by another work group and they would like it to be in the terminology implementation guide, a case like that would be something we would be interested in. Yeah.
Thanks.
Ruben.
Yeah, thanks. First, just to add some of the rationale for this IG here as well. I think it's worth considering for a moment why we're talking about decoupling terminology artifacts from IGs like AU base or eRequesting. Most of these use case specific specs or AU core, AU base currently will get 1 or 2 updates a year, which means if the terminology artifacts therein require a fix or an update or something like that, it can only happen once or twice a year. What we're aiming for with this IG is deliberately to make it an IG that can be updated far more frequently to address that problem of currency of terminology content. It's highly conceivable, given our reliance on external code systems, that those code systems may retire concepts which are in use and things like that can happen. And this provides a way of dealing with those kinds of changes without having to update the IG as a whole. So I just wanted to flag that as one benefit here. The other benefit is by centralizing our terminology content in an IG like this, the associated file package of all this content becomes a very easy way to get this content into a terminology server like Onto server, which would greatly assist implementers, especially if they're hooked up to syndication feeds that can almost automatically keep the content up to date. So that's another key advantage. To Vince's question, I think some of those V2 table additions are code systems in AU base at the moment, and that would certainly make it something that we could consider to put in this IG. My vision is that I hope as much of our content as possible can go into this IG for the aforementioned benefits. But in saying that, there may well be cases where some code systems would be better off staying within the IG, either due to immaturity of the content or potentially its use in a required binding or something like that, or for whatever reason the work group deems it necessary. But to get the maximum value out of this, I think it would be good for HL7 Australia and adopters of our specifications to try and have as much of our terminology artifacts in here as possible. Thanks, Andy.
Michael.
Oh, yeah, it ties in well, I think, to what Ruben's just said. I think definitely we had some painful times in release 1 trying to get terminology sorted for eRequesting. I think what would be good coming out of the terminology work group is those guiding principles about where terminology can or should or has to live. So I think we needed some new code systems and the like, and at the time, well, the code systems have to be an AU base was the kind of thing. So we went and moved them into them. We had all the problems of trying to coordinate an AU base release with an eRequesting release, and they're trying to get them to go side by side. But also there was the issues with the maturity of what we were doing in eRequesting. Like, it was our first cut. We hadn't tested it. We weren't quite sure what needed to be in it, how it was going to work. And we had to make some changes as we went through ballot and the like, which then meant we had to go change AU base at the same time. And so then there was lots of back and forth between the two work groups trying to get this sorted. I know the International THO has some guidelines and principles there around where terminology should live, and I think as part of that, one of them is about up until AFMM2 that they can live within the sort of IG, like the eRequesting IG, which I think makes a lot of sense, is where we're starting to work out what we need, and there's some instructions there about it has to be marked as temporary and it will be moved to another IG at a later point and all these kind of things. So you know it's not the permanent home for that terminology, but it is there while the work group's working through it and testing it and trying to mature it. And then at some point it moves across to the centralized IG. So I think if the work group's able to work through some of those and how they apply in the Australian context, that would help sort of other work groups work out what they can do now, what they need to do in the future, and that pathway to the centralized.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. And being able to run those past our work groups, like THO's got some processes, we can take those, but we want to make sure that they work for our work groups as well. So we wouldn't want to just take them off the shelf and the work group say, well, this is not working for us. So,
but I think, those guidelines then that the other work groups can work to and go, oh, okay, well, I can do this now, knowing that I need to do these things when we get to a certain point type thing.
Yep.
Ruben, with your comment on FMM2, which is just this random word that you've just thrown into the chat.
Sorry, I was that was in relation to what Michael was saying about the international HL7 terminology. The expectations for IG authors is that it's anything that's FMM3 and above should be in the international THO.
It did kind of trigger something in my mind, which was, is there more specific guidance around maturity that will apply to terminology as opposed to other FHIR resources, and not to replace, but to create more specific and interesting guidance around how we should look at maturity relative to terminology use?
Yeah.
Jem could probably answer that one. I'm not aware of anything broader than terminology at the moment.
Yeah, it's not something I have a high degree of familiarity with, but it'll be a challenge for us. Partly we might find that the breadth of implementations for terminology is not as big as in international, given that I think
you are talking to eRequesting, and it was kind of my, I guess, final thing that I wanted to I guess ask for, and that is that in my experience with implementation, especially around using test lists and procedure lists for diagnostic requesting, that there is a low level of maturity, and everyone from a diagnostic provider can close their ears at this point, but there's a relatively low level of maturity in the management of those artifacts, and there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets that get thrown around the place. There's a lot of CSV files, and there is very little consistency with things like the properties of the codes. And you'll see from different labs and different providers, they've got lovely kind of exotic kind of character supporting information that they provide, but they don't get any guidance, I think, from anyone. And I've talked to, RCPA about this, and also in radiology. So I think there's a great opportunity to also give some guidance for terminology for those who might be looking to create their own terminology, and how do they do that kind of thing. And I think we in eRequesting are probably one of the most we have a really strong use case for that, because all of these providers have these artifacts in some form or another, but they don't have a consistent way of doing it.
Second that. I'm feeling that pain as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Ruben.
Yeah, look, I agree with your point there, and it's certainly something the terminology work group would be well placed to look at working on, and as a different project for sure. Yeah, my hand was up just back to the FMM2 thing, and yeah, you have to declare that I'm actually part of the management group in international that's responsible for that terminology expectations for ID developers document, which was very, very painful to put together, and it's currently actually being revised as a much broader expectations policy for all HL7 international standards, including FHIR itself. But I just wanted to come back to the FMM2 thing. That was put in place really to manage the amount of content we'd end up having in the international THO. It's already the biggest implementation guide in terms of artifacts, possibly in the world, but definitely in HL7 international. We've got literally hundreds of code systems, value sets, naming systems, etc. And we didn't want to start putting things in there that was very low maturity and may well get retired and just be a whole lot of work for people. And that's really why the FMM2 thing is there. At the moment, I'm not as convinced that we actually need a threshold like that in HL7 Australia necessarily, because we're a much smaller standards development organization with far fewer artifacts. I'm probably leaning more towards if work groups can provide a really good argument, and ultimately it is their decision whether it goes into the proposed THO AU or not, but I'd rather them have a really good reason to keep it out than a threshold for keeping it in or out. Just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Ruben, it was really painful for us in that release 1, given that the expectation was that these code systems could be used elsewhere. Right? We needed them for eRequesting. We had eRequesting use cases for them, but they could conceivably be used elsewhere. So the concept was that they should be in like AU base, so they can be reused elsewhere. But we didn't have the maturity yet to know. And also then we had competing requirements saying, well, they're too specific to be used more generally. You got to generalize them. We've got specific eRequesting uses for them. So now we've got to manage this, make them a bit more generic. So I think there's definitely some balancing there, knowing, well, in the future we want it in there, but maybe not yet, and where that line is.
Yeah. And look, we can provide that, I suppose, with or without, making a rule about the AFM level.
Yeah, whether
necessarily.
It's a hard rule,
yeah,
or just a soft guidance. But yeah, exactly.
Nope, that sounds good. Thanks, Michael.
Vince.
Thanks. Two questions. First, I was wondering what the proposed approach is going to be around Australian versus American spelling for things like hemoglobin. Are we going to have Australianized code sets, or is the plan to adopt the international code set, which is currently the American one?
They're synonyms. To me, this is exactly what Jim and I were just talking about at the start of this meeting ad hoc. Is they're just synonyms, aren't they? Like,
well, the issue is, which do you use as the actual term that you send in a message to an external organization? Sending a synonym, if it's a local synonym, means you can't validate it. You can't do conformance checking on it, and so that becomes an issue.
So the way I've handled that is, and I guess V2 doesn't have this capability, is in Fire, you always have the text representation of a code, right? So you can put the whatever Australia wants to call this in the text representation. So that's what we show users when we present it on screen. But the codes themselves strictly have the primary display name for the code.
V2 does have that capability, but it means that the users see different things from different laboratories as the name of the test. That's not what we're trying to achieve in terms of standardization. I mean, I think it's fine to have synonyms within an organization, or to have synonyms as a search term when you're looking for, the preferred term. But really, I think you should just have a single preferred term. And if you do that, should that be Australianized or not? Anyway, that's a long discussion. I just wanted to raise that as a potential issue, and one that's been brought up in the IHE conformance process as well. But the bigger question is the relationship, and I see that Vanessa's on the call, the relationship between the terminology working group in terms of requesting and result pathology terminology, and the RCPA SPEAR terminology.
I mean, to respond, we don't have a fixed position on sort of Australianisation of display terms for that one. My hope is that we would have enough representation on the terminology work group from organisations like that, or whether on a continuing basis or as required in specific meetings when we're dealing with things like that, to consult people like RCPA and SPEAR. I know we've already got the agency folk in the meeting who publish a lot of those Fire resources corresponding to those lists. So yeah, we don't have a fixed position on trying to take control of that kind of thing. And it's one where we would much prefer to come back to the work group that's using it before we make any changes. I don't think there's any appetite in the terminology work group to take over management of these resources and address questions like these without coming back to the work group that's actually using them. And I think that's a big part of what the project needs to address as well, is what are the processes for consulting the work groups that are actually using these resources, so they can tell us whether there has been sufficient consultation of the stakeholder groups who publish these lists, and whether the code systems or value sets or maps that we're including are appropriate, and getting, in some cases, approval for that, in some cases consultation for that, and so on.
Just at the moment, there's a legislated requirement that pathology laboratories use SPEAR terminology. So that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah.
I would just add, sorry.
Yeah, go, Ruben.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Jim was saying there. The terminology work group is really a bit unique amongst the HL7 Australia work groups in that we're not really a novel content generation work group per se. We don't deal with specific use cases. We're more of an infrastructural facilitator work group. Certainly, we're happy to take on management of particular artifacts if that's what the work groups would like us to do, especially for shareable things. But largely, we actually want to ease the adoption and meaningful and effective use of terminology across HL7 Australia. That's really our remit. So, yeah, we can do content management and authorship if that's necessary, but it's not really our our primary function.
That's great.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention the issue you described, Vince. I think the big challenge on that is there's that distinction between the interoperable term, like what the code systems term for it is, and the UI display term. And I don't know, I feel like the community probably hasn't had a proper discussion about them being two different things. And I know some of the labs, some of the resistance with the SPEAR terms is they want to keep their terms, and whether or not, like what sort of traction that the community's got there for everyone to have the exact same display to the user. That's sort of an open discussion to be had, I think, because they're not the same. There's the code system term, and then there's what's actually shown to the user. And I think a lot of the discussions to date have said they're the same thing. And that would be simple if they were. But if someone wants to customize how their reports look to stand out from the crowd,
yeah, and
I don't know what the answer is.
Users do this anyway. They just overlay an alias that they create for these things because that's the term, and that's the thing that they want to select and use. And then do you then have an obligation to carry through the description that user has actually chosen in the user interface as at least the text of what's described, even though there's a fully qualified code sitting behind it, and it's matched to that. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of question. There's a lot of flexibility around obviously doing that with FIBOS coding.
I think the NPAC requirements are fairly explicit about that you have to use the preferred term from SPEAR, no matter what, at least for the laboratories. In terms of what the users use to order stuff, at the moment that's up to them. But the actual term that has to go in the message or in the FHIR bundle has to follow the SPEAR requirement.
I think, is it in the message, is it the one, I think Angus said, is it the display text or the original text? Like,
it's the preferred term has to go in the display text.
Brett.
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back a bit to the AU base binding and stuff like that, because I think I'd really like the terminology work group to help us out with the use case specific and the more domain oriented usage of the terminology. I mean, I've even got stuff now with eRequesting's done some stuff around communication requests. There's a terminology defined in terms of request, but it's also potentially bound into records of communication, and the terms don't make sense, right? Because they're not request records, they're now past communication records. So there's all of that stuff, which is kind of like I think some eyeballs over how that goes together, mainly around code systems and how code systems are built if we're building them from scratch. So that's kind of like, what does a good code system look like, and how would we actually apply it, because AU base is really concerned about generic usage and kind of just having an information model to say this will be this makes sense in all cases. And obviously when you're in a specific use case, you will definitely use subsets of that for different purposes. But I think, building those code systems up well is really interesting, because even right now there's codes in there. I go, if I have a communication request attached to my eRequest, if I actually make that request and want to record the communication with a communication resource, that code doesn't really make sense, even though it's essentially one that you would bind into an element, for that use. So I think all of those things, there's a bit of like taking a bit of a bigger picture question on how those terms are defined, and then how does that make sense in the use case as well. And I think that's the tricky stuff, and I think that's hard, I think, for any individual work group to really consider, because we don't necessarily have all the perspectives of all the users. So I think that's a good place where terminology work group could add some real value to say, we do have a problem, we need to get together. Stuff like that.
Thanks, Brad. Sorry, Jim. 15 minutes is really stretching out here for you. Yep. Question 2.
That's all right. The question 2 is really kind of the stuff that we've been getting to anyway. It's starting to look at what sort of change process would work groups want to see for terminology resources that did end up in the terminology implementation guide, for when there was a change that was requested, whether it came from the work group or it came from somewhere else. We see a need for a persistent record of which work groups or projects or IGs are stakeholders in the resource, so that if there is a change requested, then that work group or project or whatever has the opportunity to approve that change because it has a significant impact on them. Or if the resource is used across multiple work groups, maybe there's other work groups that need to be consulted or informed. So there are structures for already for recording which work group quote unquote own a resource, but we see a need where we might need to go beyond that so that we can identify multiple work groups that need to be consulted about changes to resources that might be shared. And then as to what that approval looks like, whether someone from terminology comes back to this meeting and says, here's the proposed change, and it gets voted on, or what is something that we're open to as well. So whatever works for individual work groups. So that's something else that we'd be looking for input on, what sort of process would suit the work groups for that change management process. So there's some open questions there. It's been really good to have these discussions, and I'm glad there's a transcript that I can sort of send to Claude and take back a summary for inclusion in our scope statement. And if people have more input coming out of these questions or others for what the terminology implementation guide might look like or include, then we're open to hearing those, either by coming to our meetings or just sending us an email, either to the chairs or to us individually. So I really appreciate the discussion.
Thanks, Jim. It's always good to hear some informed commentary. Does anyone have any last questions to Jim before I hand over to Ruben? Okay, Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy. So this is just to give everyone a heads up on another piece of work that the terminology work group has been working on for the past few weeks. We've mentioned the international THO before, and for those of you familiar with THO would know that there is a dedicated part of that publication that deals with external content, such as external code systems and identifier systems. And what you may not be aware of is in the FIRE spec, it actually emphasizes that the authoritative or canonical URIs for code systems and identifier systems, if they're not part of the FIRE standard itself, the next place to look is actually THO. And up until, in fact, it's not yet done, but we've identified that none of the HL7 Australia defined code systems or identifier systems and their canonical URIs are actually published in the international THO. And we set a task for ourselves to try and address that through the Terminology Services Management Group's Unified Terminology Governance Process, which is how you make updates to THO. So we've done some work to actually add all of the HL7 Australia code systems, identifier systems, mostly in AU base at the moment, just to add records for those to THO as part of a change request. And what I wanted to give everyone a heads up on is later today, I'll be making a post to the Australia channel with a link to the branch where all these changes have been made. We're hoping to get some feedback from anyone who's interested on anything they'd like changed or more information on before we formally submit that change request for implementation in THO. So this is just a heads up that'll be coming later today, and happy to take any questions now if there are any. Great. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Ruben. That's certainly a value add that, if nothing else, takes away a whole bunch of extra work that each of the individual work groups and projects we need to do. So to have that consistently done is a good thing. Any other terminology questions? Linda's gone off in their commentary about guidance. So
sorry about that, Andy.
No, it's all good.
Couldn't help myself.
I know. I can imagine. No, it's good. It's good discussion, and I think there is a lot of, especially eRequesting, we have a lot of dependencies back into terminology. So getting that sorted is an interesting part of our journey. All right. If there's no more questions, can we jump into specimen, Angus?
Yep. I'll need a big container, but we can try.
Is it just one container, or can we have multiple containers?
Where am I?
Just as we're getting started, I just wanted to make sure that people understand the concept that's different of what the specimen is that is collected and what the specimen is that's actually used for analysis for a specific test. So in terms of blood, whole blood is always or nearly always what is collected, but most of the tests actually get done on components of that, the serum, plasma, etc. And a lot of that's controlled by the additives that go into the tubes that are collected, but the actual specimen is whole blood for them all, even though they might have some fluoride in there for a glucose tube, or they might have some anticoagulant in there for if you're doing coagulation studies. So that's a distinction that I think is often not realised.
And is primarily and it is sort of seen in the colours of the tubes, Vince. Like that's why we see yellow tubes, blue tubes, purple tubes, is because those tubes come manufactured with ingredients in them, and you put whole blood in them, and it mixes with the ingredients in there to create the sample required.
And in fire there is the ability to have a container and the additives in that container specified. I'm not sure, Angus, and maybe someone on the call can clarify this, whether the colour of the tubes is actually standardised across different pathology groups or suppliers of tubes, etc. So I don't know whether that can be used as a label or not.
I don't believe so. Like each lab will have their own collection manual and say, we want a yellow, we want a blue for this test in their own collection manuals, but I don't believe there's any standardization about which color for which test, because it comes down to each lab and the analyzers they're using and how they do it and what they decide the tube they want. And I don't think here, and I don't think that's a concern for us here. We're certainly not going to standardize what tubes are collected for what tests. We're just trying to record what tube was collected for the test, rightly or wrongly.
Sure, but it's how we identify those tubes that's the issue. I
think the colours are standard. Like I think a lavender top, every lab would consider that the same. I assume.
Yeah, I think that's true at a high
what
rate.
test-
Like
yeah.
if you say a purple top, then you're talking an EDTA tube. There might be, like I've noticed, like I was about to say in my slides that a histo container is blue with formalin in it, but then I noticed Googling there's many other, Sonic's got red ones, right? But I think that's a histo container thing. But I think when you come to the blood tubes, it's different because they're manufactured by manufacturers and they've all aligned that, EDTA tubes are purple, and there is a bit of a color coding thing at a high rate.
Be nice to think that was the case. I just wanted to have that confirmed because different manufacturers might have a different view on that. But yeah, I haven't seen any variation in those colors, but I don't know whether there's any formal specification of that.
Yeah. Yes, and look, we need to get into that weeds eventually. Like, because are we going to ask doctors to record, I collected a yellow top tube, or are we going to say, no, I collected or I collected a purple top, or are we going to say I collected an EDTA tube, and then they're going to struggle with, they probably don't know what to call a purple top beyond it being a purple top.
Isn't this though that, I think that why we need to focus in on the use cases and the examples, because how many practices are collecting blood?
It's some, but not as much as swabs and urines and things like that. But and mainly because it's a skill required to put a needle in someone's arm, and they balk at that and get the nurse to do it.
And they would then have to carry all of those kind of containers and additives and stuff for if they're going to have a much broader kind of approach to it.
Most practices out in the country do that because they don't have collection centres. So, it's the collection centres have sort of de-skilled doctors in urban areas, but certainly in more remote practices, they definitely take blood.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing is just you probably, I think when we go through these discussions, it's probably also just worth, revisiting the fire building blocks that are actually in play, from the service request through specimen through container, and just the relationship between them, because it's not obvious when you're doing this.
Yeah, this slide, which we presented some time ago, I think I can't drive PowerPoint very well. Gets to that the parts in the fire resource, right? Like it's a nice visual graphic here, but the fire resource can in for one sample can tell you all these things: the body site it came from, the collection method, how you collected it, the sample type, what was it? The whole blood Vince was talking about would be the specimen type, the container type, what kind of physical container it is, the container additive, which Vince was talking about, like the liquid that's in the tube, like a purple top has a special additive which is different to what's in a yellow top, and then at the end, processing procedure, which is more lab, like what you then do with the sample later. So the fire resource has all these elements. It's not to say that we are now going to force doctors to tell us all these elements. It just means that the fire resource has the capability of recording all of these elements specifically. So it's quite detailed, but I think this kind of presents the challenge we have is we can't just throw that at a doctor and say, you need to tell us all these things. And to Vince's points, like additive is kind of expressed through the color of the blood tube, right? And so, anyway, I think that's our challenge, is how to keep this reasonable for doctors without going over the top and expressing everything we need to know, or not that we need to know, that you could know. Okay, I'll go back to my start. So just pulling back a bit. So what are we talking about? We're focusing on this use case that we voted on sometime. So recording of a collected specimen, use the specimen resource to record the details of a specimen that has been collected. For instance, it's in the requester's office, in the doctor's office. So at this time, I collected this pus swab from a wound on the back of the patient's left hand. So that's kind of our use case of what we're focusing on. In the fire resources, when we have a service request, this is referenced from the service request to a specimen resource via this reference. Noting a specimen can have a parent specimen, but I don't know if we need to get into that complexity. And we're not doing the other one, not at this point in time, which is referencing something that we're suggesting someone collect. We're focusing on, I have collected these things, how do I tell you about them? So over the next few slides, so we've got a number of examples where we've sort of mocked up a request, like the tests being requested, and then present the samples that have been collected for those tests. I should argue, again, wrongly or rightly, there's collection manuals out there from all the labs saying for this test you should collect these tubes, and the examples try to express that. But as Vince kind of alluded to, not so much with color types, but different labs may have different requirements about what samples they want for that test. We're not trying to solve that, but we're just trying to record what did the doctor collect. So some of the questions we're trying to ask here is like, can many containers be recorded in one fire specimen resource? When and why must more than one specimen fire resource be used? How do we correlate between the container, the sample, and the record of it in the specimen resource? Identifiers, labels, things like that. So we'll get into them. They start off with the dead simple one, which is probably worth looking at, but I've ordered a test and I have one tube, right? So immediately we don't have problems about which test do I do on which tube, because there's only one, but we probably want to record, and there's a questionable whether it's even mandatory to record this. Like, you know, if that's all you've requested and collected, do we require specimen information or not? So that's the simplest one. Maybe we'll look at a few and then look at the fire resource, which I have. So here's another example where I have requested quite a few tests, and I'm providing one sample. So again, little argument that my intent was you are to do these tests on this sample. And again, we're not trying to argue, is this correct? Should have they collected another sample? It's not really the point here, I think. The point is the intent of the doctor. He asked for these tests and he gave us this sample. And again, I don't think this one's terribly difficult. We still have to work it out, but there's sort of no question that his intent was that we were to do these tests on that sample. Next one, and I'll say I had trouble labeling this because maybe I'm not skilled enough with histology, but he's asked for histology and he's given us 3 jars. I loosely think, and I could be wrong here and shot down in flames, that he's taken one histo sample, but he couldn't fit it in one jar, cut it into 3 pieces and put it in 3 jars, as opposed to another example might be he ordered 3 histos and they're completely separate samples, like a mole off your left hand, a mole off your left foot, and a mole off the back of your neck. And so they're all 1-to-1. He has to label them, but that's kind of a different scenario to this. And I'd be welcome for anyone's comment. Is that even a reality? I know that they're not advised to cut samples into 3 pieces, but I don't know if this is a valid example or not.
It does happen. So, for instance, for breast biopsies, they'll often do 2 or 3 biopsies and put them in separate tubes, but they're all, you know, breast biopsies. So
yeah, and even with that example, yeah, and would you say single breast biopsies? Are they not left right?
Yeah, single breast biopsies.
Yeah,
but would that be 3 separate specimens?
They'd be in separate containers, yes.
No,
they're the same specimen type, so they're actually the same specimen, you know, breast tissue, but they're from slightly different sites within the breast.
Yeah, but like, would you represent them as separate specimen identities that each have one container rather than one specimen in 3 containers?
No, there'd be a single specimen type in 3 separate containers.
Its specimens instances are not unique by type. So you could have, for instance, you could be taking 2, I don't know, 2 swabs that are the same type, but they're actually separate. I understand they're coming from the 3 kind of specimens of the same body site. But I guess I'm just wondering whether the distinction is, from representing them in fire would be that you would still have them represented as separate specimens.
So as I've got on screen, Andy, like, are we talking about breast top, mid, left, and they're 3 separate to be tested individually, or are they all, that lump on the breast and I couldn't fit it in one jar, so I cut it into 3 pieces?
Yeah. And you could do either one of those, I guess. And I don't know whether, we would be making guidelines about specimen collection. It's more, do you add constraints such that some options are not allowed? And I don't know whether that is where you kind of go. I'm just, Vince, when you talk about specimen type, that just seems to be one attribute of a specimen.
Sure. I mean, I would think of this as this particular example as a single specimen that you've got 3 samples of. So I would think of that as a single specimen in 3 separate tubes, because you actually don't know what's in those specimens. I mean, it could be breast tissue, it could be fat tissue, it could be cancer, etc. So
sort of correlate with reporting, you wouldn't expect 3 reports back. You'd expect 1 report back.
Well, you can have lots and lots of histopathology samples that would all go into a single report. So even if you had,
even grossly different, like left to right, would be in 1 report.
Well, even completely different tissues. You might be looking at something like von Recklinghausen's, and you've got samples of the tumours from all sorts of different tissues, skin and fingernails, and even internal organs that would all contribute to that diagnosis and might be provided together as a set of samples.
Vince, I think there's an NPAC cut up for histology samples, so there's standards around this and who does it.
Yeah, but those apply to the laboratory, not to the person taking the samples.
Yeah, but they wouldn't start cut up in the doctor's surgery, for example.
No, but say at operation, they might, as Angus says, have to cut the tissue into multiple pieces to be able to actually fit it in the container. But yes, those NPAC guidelines definitely apply to the laboratory in terms of how they subsequently process it.
And I feel histo is quite a special case in itself, in that I know that as it flows through the process through specimen reception, it really just all gets delivered to histo, and they then put it and make their own decisions about what are they going to do with this. Like, it's not, because of the specialty of it, it's not upstream. Like, upstream really just deliver the whole payload. Like, here's the request, here's all the things we got. And then at the cut-up bench, a very specialized, a pathologist is really assessing all that and making decisions about what is he going to do here. It's very much its own beast. But I guess all we're trying to do is a tool to the doctor, the person who produced these samples, to express what are they, like, label them, record them. They're not really dictating what the lab is to do, how they're going to address them, and how they're going to carve them up into different reports. And they're really just trying to label truthfully what they collected, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, and that may be multiple different specimen types, but I would have thought that we would have one specimen per container. Would be the simplest way of dealing with that.
Yeah, let's look at the others, because I think these questions.
I just would have thought that the specimen where it was cut up and put into separate containers because it's too big would be pretty limited or negligible. I just remember, working in a general lab, you get the whole leg in a plastic bag, and then you'd have to deal with the histo people had to deal with that. So,
That's true. That is true.
It's certainly not I read a LinkedIn post only the other day, which I thought was very good. It was from Paul Carroll, or liked by Paul Carroll, which was pathologists pleading about sample collection, saying, do not do that. Do not cut the thing up into many bits, put it in a bigger jar. So, but then there's the reality of what happens in the recommended. And I've seen histo samples described as gravel and coming in, all bits, right? And because it sort of falls apart, So
the fire data you can carry relative to a container is pretty limited.
Maybe we should just briefly look at the specimen resource again, just to refresh what we have here. So, service request, specimen.
Can you make it a bit bigger?
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I'm here for you, David.
Yeah, good.
All right. So just walking down the things, so we have a specimen resource, of course. So there's the decisions about, do I create 2 specimen resources or 1? Because one test could have 2 specimen resources. And then, it has an identifier up here. It has stuff about how it was collected. And I thought this interesting, that if you've got 1 specimen resource, it can only be 1 collection date time, right? So you can't have 2 containers in 1 specimen resource that are collected at different times, because you literally cannot express that with a specimen resource. So as soon as you collect 2 samples at different collection date times, which there's an example coming, like GGT, you're forced to create 2 specimen resources, because you can't record 2 samples in one with different collection date times, because it's there. And then there's processing, which I don't think's a big concern of ours yet. Containers, really where we're talking, and note, many containers. So 1 specimen resource can house more than 1 container, but to my point, they must all be collected at the same date and time. But you can then put an identifier on those containers. You can describe those containers. They can have different specimen container, or different types of containers. So you could have a blood and a urine in 1 specimen resource, as long as they were collected at the same time. And question why you're doing that. Capacity.
But you can't have containers.
Additive.
You can't have containers with different types of specimens in the same specimen resource.
Yeah, because where's specimen type?
Right up front. You just scroll down.
Right at the top. Type. Yeah. So you are right. So yeah, you couldn't have blood and urine in 1 specimen resource, but you could have many bloods or many different urine jars.
The thing we don't want to end up with, though, is in the container description, you don't want to end up being able to override the specimen data with container specific data. So, there's nothing restricting what you type in the description, but obviously if you said the description in this container is an additional kind of or type of specimen kind of thing, but you've attached it to this other specimen. I was just thinking about Vince's thing where this conundrum, you could shoehorn 2 different ways of doing this. You could, with that single body site with multiple, the same specimen type from that body site, and you've got 3 containers, that thing, like, as you noted in your example, top, mid, left, or some location information potentially, there is nowhere in the container other than a description to document that additional data, because I think the body site is in the collection.
It's the same as that time.
So you couldn't separate containers, and containers are virtually clones in some ways of each other.
But I mean, I think that example, you'd have, you know, body site left breast and container description, you know, multiple biopsies, mid top, mid center, mid bottom, etc.
Is that what you want to do though? Or do you want to do that is that really a codable body site? Because you then got laterality as a post-coordinated expression of body site.
Well, the body site is left breast, and I think the actual description, you know, where exactly within that body site your biopsy was taken, that's very descriptive. I mean, it's not a codable concept.
Yeah, you can cut this either way, isn't it? It's just about how broad is your body site, you know, how broad or narrow it is, and then you're subcategorizing in it, aren't you? So one person might see this as 3 different specimens: breast, mid, breast top, breast bottom, and then another person might see that as one breast left with 3 containers, mid, center, bottom.
And I think, you know, if they want to do that, that's fine. I don't see why we should be prescriptive about that. It's up to the user to decide how they want to describe it, as long as they have the option.
I guess that's
Do you want to click on description, and because it says it's the textual description of the container, not necessarily. Is it also allowing for the textual description of what's in the container?
No, it's literally the description of the physical jar, not what's in it.
And it's 0 to 1.
The what's in it was this thing, wasn't it? Kind of material that forms the specimen. That's what's in the jar.
Yeah, and that's where I struggle to get that additional detail if you are saying that there are 3 containers, and when they didn't do them as a specimen, I don't know how you overload or put that information in any reasonable way.
So maybe they are actually separate specimens. They just happen to all be of the same specimen type.
Is there a simplicity here in just almost, and I'm just throwing this out and scream me down, but like if you made this 1.1, and you forced everyone to go, I don't care, like every container you have, you must give me a specimen resource. Is that a simplification that's of use? You know, like at least it corrals everyone to go, there's no ifs and buts. There's no like, I'm going to do it this way and he's going to do it that way. It's just that you're all now going to give me 1 specimen resource per container.
No, but that doesn't make sense for things like, you know, if you're taking blood, then, you know, I need a volume of this. I can't physically stick it in 1 container. It's going to be in 3 containers, but they're absolute clones of one another. They're just part 1, part 2, part 3 of the same specimen. That all makes complete sense. That example of tissue is, I think, going to get more. I think it obeys your rule now for tissue, but as you said, I think it'd be pretty rare to be dicing and slicing it up because you can't.
Is it really a problem with blood? So if I collect 3 SST tubes because I've ordered lots of tests, does it really matter if I then give you 3 specimen resources, all SST? Like they all look the same. They're all identical, right? Like, but you're labeling them 1, 2, 3. Like, does that really matter? As opposed to putting the 3 in 1 specimen resource and being, you know, informatics perfect.
If we look at the other end and what the lab is going to use this for, they're going to want to check that, you know, the actual physical specimens they've got are the same as was recorded by the orderer. So as long as they can do that, it probably doesn't matter. If they could say, okay, we've got 3 blood specimens, that's fine.
Yeah, it's a very good way of looking at it, isn't it? Because that's what they're really worried about, is the 4th specimen, which somehow got mixed across bags and is not really for this request.
Yeah.
That's probably more and of course the labeling. I mean, the labeling's duplicated, isn't it? Like they're going to write left eye swab on the container, and then in here, right? Like it. But this, like, they could label them incorrectly, like 2 left eye swabs, and then they say there's a left and a right, but there's only 2. But that's kind of the same thing.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, I know it happens all the time, and I guess, or you could even not so much left and right wrong, but your request says left hand swab, and then you get a left foot swab, and you're like, and so something's mixed up wrong, which is
either that or you need to go back to the orderer and ask for a clarification. Yeah.
Which is our primary use case here, isn't it? We're not really trying to record. We're not trying to automate the lab's processes because they know details about the sample. We're just trying to capture errors in the wrong specimens we're provided with the request.
That all specimens have been delivered. I mean, you might have to wait for it. You know, it's 24-hour urine. You might have got the blood for the creatinine clearance before you get the urine. So you then know you've got to wait for the urine. So you could flag that in your system. So just knowing whether all the specimens that were collected have arrived is a really key laboratory requirement.
So I'll just go back to let's just get through the rest of the examples, because let's assess whether we think these examples are thorough enough. Like, are we happy? Do we need another example? So we had the histo one.
And it's just to note that the containers cannot be referenced independently. They are bound within a specimen. So they're only it's not a reference to a container. So you can't refer to a container in isolation. You can only refer to the specimen because that's the resource.
Is that true given what we're trying to achieve here? No one can really look in the container at what's in it and decide whether that's right or wrong.
No, I'm just saying from a fire perspective in terms of the data, you can't reference a container without you can't reference it on its own. There is no fire way of doing that. You can only reference the specimen, and then you could say. So
the minimum we're going to say this is of a specimen of this type: blood, urine, spit, whatever it is, and it's come in a container with maybe some description or identifier. It's kind of like the minimum use case and a collection date, isn't it?
There was just a question about. There was just a question about what if you order an add-on test and one of the tubes is empty and there are 2 more stored? Your system would need to make all 3 available. But I guess I was getting at you would never be referencing an empty tube because you don't reference from a fire perspective. You don't reference the container. You only will be referencing specimen. So I'm just kind of saying that we've got to be careful the way we talk about this. We're not talking about the container and the specimen as being equal. One is a fire resource, the specimen, and it happens to be the container is just an attribute of a specimen. It's not something that can be independently referred to. It only comes as part of the specimen. So you can only talk about all 3, because they all 3 are attached to the specimen. If you wanted to do something specifically with container number 2, you would still be referring to the specimen to get to container number 2 because you can't chuck it around by itself.
Sure.
Sorry, keep going.
Let's just get through the examples. There's 4 more, I think. So next one was sputum MCNS ×3. David had this one. So this is where it's 1 test, but they're collecting it over 3 days, and so I guess this is the example of the collection date and time is different. Therefore, it forces separate specimen resources. So it's probably not that complicated in that sense, but it's a thing.
So 3 specimens. Each specimen has a container.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's almost 1 to. It's as if this was 3 separate tests. It's just ×3, isn't it? Okay, next one. So glucose tolerance test. So this is similar again. You're collecting a baseline at 1 collection date and time. Then you're collecting another one an hour later and another one 2 hours later. It's after they drink some glucose stuff to see their body consume the glucose and get rid of it. And so it's similar. I guess it's the same as this one, isn't it? It's one test, but it requires 3 results in a way, like the baseline, the 1 hour, the 2 hour. So we've got specimens that represent that. The different collection date times, 3 different, in this case, probably 4 specimens, isn't it? Because this is a different type. Like this is, you wouldn't put these in one specimen resource, would you?
Well, you could, because they're both of type blood.
True.
And
yeah, then the containers are
different
changing.
Containers. Yeah,
yes, so you could. You are dead right. You could. That would be 1 specimen, 2 containers, collected at the same time, same material inside.
So these have the same material, but they're actually physically different containers.
And different additives, because the yellow top, the purple top, right?
I think from a lab perspective, though, they would consider those different specimens. Like one would be treated as whole blood, and the other one would ultimately be treated as serum.
Well, that's after they've processed it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when when it's taken, they're all whole blood, and that's what and we're looking at the context of the order out here.
And you can,
but I'm with Matt in a.
I was going to say you can in fire because the additive is associated with the container. You can have 1 specimen, 2 containers, and each container has a different additive. So
I mean,
that would make sense.
You can do that, but whether you do that or whether you actually make them all separate specimens, I don't think matters. And I think we just leave it up to the user to decide.
I'm somewhat with Matt that
once it's in that container.
Until you get to the actual testing and reporting upstream through SRA, they're just going to look at that and say there's 4 specimens, right? Like
because once it comes out of your arm, it's no longer just blood. Like you can't do the same test on either tube. It's as soon as it goes into that tube, they're 2 different types of specimen.
That's true.
No labs like like coagulation tests, all that's going to be different.
This is like my controversial thing of sort of going, is it not just 1 specimen per 1 container? Because that's how people think until you get to the actual analysis where they know far more about what's being achieved here. And of course, they see this as, we're doing different tests on that purple tube to the yellow tube. But as far as delivering it to the scientists in the lab to do the testing, everyone else upstream just thinks of that as 4 specimens.
Yeah.
And they want to label them 1, 2, 3, 4, right? They don't want to label it 1, 1, 2, 3.
So R5 is removed additive from container.
Yeah.
So in that case, it would be different. Each specimen has the additive is now associated with the specimen, not with the container.
Yeah.
So it does follow your and Matt's kind of thing. It's
and if I jump 2 examples ahead, this example, this again is, you could say these are 1 sample, right? We're just collecting 2 tubes because we're worried that you won't have enough blood. But everyone upstream will think of that as 2 samples. There's 2 samples there, 1 and 2, even though you can technically say it's just 1 sample spread across 2 tubes, right?
But I think that comes to Vince's thing. Doesn't matter.
I don't think it matters. Like you can do any of those tests on any of those tubes.
But I think the other one does matter where there's 2 different additives. That one I think is.
But there can be 1 tube that like you don't want the blood to clot, but it's clotted, so it's unusable, and that happens quite regularly. So you do need to label them as something different.
You definitely need to label them tube 1 and 2. And you're right, like if one has become clotted and the other one isn't, or hemolyzed, one's hemolyzed and the other one isn't.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, but that's a lab concern, right? Like they're going to get their sample to do the testing and they look at it and go, oh my God, it's hemolyzed. I can't use this. And then they go back to the request and go, oh, there was a second tube, which is also whole, exactly the same. I'll use that one, right? So
they're different specimens.
They are different.
Yeah. The logic.
And you should be reporting on both. So we should be reporting back to say, yes, that is hemolyzed. And on the second tube, we did all the tests.
Yeah.
Yeah. But none of that's got, like when we look at how we're recording it, Like, it's just this argument, like, in that scenario, do we have one specimen resource that records 2 containers of the same type with their own identifier and label? So yes, there are 2 samples. We're just putting them in a group and saying there's one group that has 2 samples. Or do we say to people, no, you have to create 2 different samples, each with 1 container? And it's kind of like both work. Does it matter which way people do it?
I do think we should give some guidance relative to R5. That not everyone is going to look at the R4, and the options available for R4 are much broader than the R5 is narrower intended use. So I think we
look at R5. So R5 here has ripped out additive, have they?
Which there is part of the processing, but it's not part of the container.
Where is it? Where's additive now? It's
processing. I think it's in down there, down near the container. Yeah.
So that implies that these containers must all have the same additive, where the other structure allowed you to have different additives per container, didn't it? Like, you could have a purple and a yellow in the old structure, but here you can't.
Yeah. Which means that, you know, it would just be useful guidance to say, yes, you're not disallowing it, but you know, to be better future proofing, given this is new, you should have separate specimens
per color, per additive.
Yeah. And really the only option you can have is that if there is a large sample that has to sit across multiple containers, then they virtually are, you know, cloned material. Same purpose, same action, same whatever.
I'm still struggling with what is the rational use case to put 2 containers in one specimen resource. Like, because that's, people are going to miss that. They're just not going to assume that, are they? Like, if you give them the flexibility to do it, when are they going to do it? When you know, they're just going to go, I've got 3 objects on my desk, I'm going to create 3 samples and record the 3 objects. Not, I'm going to group these 2 objects into the one, create 1 specimen with 2, like, just won't do it. They're just.
I think you're right. I think we just took the simple approach and said, you know, each container is a specimen type, a specimen rather. Then that makes it straightforward and obvious.
And if we were modeling this for the intricacies of a lab sampling system in the lab, then sure, you would go to this level, right? But
yeah. And I mean, a container is optional, so they may not even bother to record the container.
Let's keep going through the examples.
We got 1 minute, Angus. So
we've only got 2 more. I got a couple more. So we did that one. This one's 24-hour creatinine clearance. So they've got a 24-hour urine and a blood, which were, dare I say, collected at different times, because you did this at home, and this was collected. David, is this collected when you're given the jar or when you come to deliver the jar? I guess either way, it's a different.
Yeah, either way, I can't really remember.
And they're different sample types, so it's clearly 2 different specimen resources recording each. So I don't think it's too difficult. This one we kind of touched on. I think we've talked about that enough to move to the next one. And this one is fairly straightforward, where you're getting 3 tubes, but people who know that the full blood count's done on the purple, the liver function's done on the yellow, and the INR's done on the blue. So this is definitely 3 specimen resources, and this sort of gets to the correlation, which tube is for which test. And I think a key point here is doctors don't, like, it's obvious to everyone who knows that doctors aren't even going to want to tell you. They're just going to go, they're probably not even going to record this, right? Because to them, it's like, it's obvious, right? You're going to do the full blood count on the so this is kind of the case where you could record these, but doctors will be annoyed if we ask them to record these. They won't see the point.
Yeah.
That's all the examples.
Well, there was going to be a brief discussion.
So I think we've learned that the troublesome ones are this scenario, like there's multiple ways to do it, and then this scenario, because there's multiple ways to do it, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think we've also sort of more or less landed at the point where we should just take the simple, stupid approach and say, if you've got a separate container, it's a separate specimen.
I'm in that camp. Because don't do that. We fall into the fallacy of health informatics wants you to, tell us everything, and then we've just got in their way.
Yeah, exactly.
And that means you need to join all of those specimens to all of the tests. You don't want saying, I ordered this test and used this specimen. I ordered this one and used this other specimen. They shouldn't be making, at that point, the decision about which specimen is for which test. Is that the guidance?
The labs decide that. And in fact, they may choose to do something like a sodium on either a serum or a plasma or a whole blood, or even on a fluoride tube, depending on how much sample there is and how they're set up. So
I also think there's an argument. I also think it's an argument to say that we want to have the least constrained and then get some experience on how it's used. And if someone says, no, you must have it more constrained, then you can kind of overlay those. But sure. I think trying to do it up front is a bit interesting. I think, though, you guys have given some suggested guidance that might help, with decision making on how to use this. So we could probably include some of that. But Angus, knowing we're 2 minutes over time,
yeah.
Are we in a position to? And I know Michael Osborne did this a couple of weeks ago, just to put up. Well, what does this look like? Is kind of a bit of a profile, must supports.
Must supports, yeah. I think we are. I think having come over this, I think we can have a crack at showing a profile with must supports, which okay. Michael's done some of. So maybe that's next week. We'll do that.
Yeah, 2 weeks time. All right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for taking 3 more minutes of your time. You all good, Dave McKillop?
Yep, thanks for that.
No worries.
Claude's a dream.
Excellent. Yes, he's my friend too. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good weekend. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.